back to the Consecrated Life Project, where we talk about embracing your mission, living your purpose with faith and confidence. Today, our guest is Ganel-Lyn Condie. Thank you so much for being with us.
I'm so grateful to be with you. I feel like when appointments are finally happening, when there's the communication and planning beforehand, and then it finally gets here, it feels like Christmas. So I'm so glad it's actually here today.
Oh, it so does. It feels like that for me too. Like when you get your book and it's like in the mail and you're like, oh, it's like Christmas.
Well, it's birthing a baby. If any writers are listening, it definitely is a birth process of gestation and delivery, and they hand the baby to you. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. That's awesome. Right. So I have known of you for many, many years. I don't know. You probably don't know how long I've known of you.
I don't think I do.
So I've been like following you on Facebook and things for a while now. So I've known a bit about who you are, and everybody keeps saying, oh, do you know her? And I'm like, well, I know her, but I don't know her. I feel like I know her.
Who was our common friend first?
I don't even remember. There's been so many people who they've been like, oh, have you talked to her? I'm like, yes, but no. But yes.
Yeah.
So I love the things that I've seen and everything from you.
Thank
I
you.
just appreciate you being here. So Ganel-Lyn is an author. She's a speaker. She's a writer. She just spreads light and joy and messages, and especially those of suicide awareness, and helping people to really realize that they are children of God and the worth that they have inside of them to be able to use that in whatever way God needs them. So I'm really, really excited to talk to you and hear more about your story today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So just give us a quick 2-minute intro. Where are you from? What does your life look like at this point? And what are you passionate about?
So I am a mom and a wife, and I have 2 children. So my son, if you are a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you'll understand some of my vernacular, but I really feel passionate about reaching an interfaith community. So I've come to know that we all come to God in different paths, but so my Jewish friends, my Muslim friends, my evangelical friends all get some of what I'm saying, even if we worship in different ways. So my son not recently, but I keep saying that, a year ago returned from a 2-year mission for our church. He went to Africa. He will be 22 in December. And then I have a daughter that will turn 16 in January. And it took 7 years to have our son and 6 years to have our daughter. So in the years of those infertility, I've been a wife for 28 years, even though it took a while to get the kids. I am a media contributor, so I do a lot of TV, radio, podcasting. I have a YouTube channel and a podcast myself, and I write books and I speak a lot. It's a season of my life. I'm almost 50, and so oftentimes I get a lot of emails and messages from people that want to write or speak, and they wonder how I juggle it. I'm definitely in a season in my life where it's probably healthier that I have these things for my daughter, who's the one at home right now. My son's living near campus, and so even though we live within 20 minutes of him, he doesn't live at home. We see him for Sunday dinner and for family gatherings, but so it's been a process leading up to what I'm doing now. And like all of us, we have things planted on our hearts from God. And some of the things happening in my life, it's very emotional for me, because these are things that have been on my heart since I was a very tiny little girl. And so to see how the Lord has like unfolded them in my life in a timing purpose, I think it's really important that as women especially, just as much as my dream was to speak and write and be on TV, my dream was to be a wife and a mother. It's both. And I think it's really important to know God holds our dreams safely. And so sometimes as women, we're afraid to say no to something because we're afraid that was the last chance. Anyone that's read my book, The Decision That Changed My Life, they know that I will walk away from really big things if God puts it on my heart. Just like he's preparing big stuff for us, he's also wondering, are you willing to say no so I can orchestrate your life? And so what I'm doing now, the quick answer is a mission. And so that means it can, just like my son, he had a 2-year mission and then it ended and he got on a plane and came home. Now he's trying to figure out how to be an adult I call it baby adulting. I feel like the same. What I'm doing now is a mission, which means it can change, it can end. It's not about me, it's about my boss. And there's a lot of chatter out in the world right now on social media platforms and bookstores and YouTube channels. And so I want to add, I do always message about suicide prevention because 5 years ago, my 40-year-old sister took her life. So no matter where I'm at, I will always include that as my message at some level, because I believe we can talk about that later. It affects everyone. But it's not the only thing I talk about. People think I kind of have, when people approach me about speaking or doing media, they think I have a spiel or a thing, and I don't. I message about everything, but I always will talk about depression, anxiety, mental wellness, and suicide prevention because of my sister Meg.
That's beautiful. Well, that leads right into our next question here. What is the story about how you came to find your mission and purpose? Like, we know that they change, and God says, now you're doing this, and then he moves you, and now you're doing this. But right now you're in this speaking, this writing, this really actively out there spreading your message.
Yeah.
How did you find that that's what I'm supposed to do?
So I've shared this pretty publicly. I look back and I can see where seasons are important, and I believe in the pattern of God. When you read scripture, whether it's the Torah, the King James version of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, whatever it is, you see patterns, and one of God's patterns is seasons. And he'll often take his people out into the wilderness to lead them to the promised land. That's what he did with Moses. In the Book of Mormon, he did that with Lehi's family and the Jaredites. And so I very much feel like, as I look back on almost 49 years of my life, there's been seasons. And as a very young child, I would rather have watched the Today Show and then eventually Oprah and Phil Donahue than any other show. I didn't want to watch cartoons as a little kid. I wanted to watch people telling their story. That has always been my passion. And as a young girl, my mom was a single mom. She had gone through a divorce. My sister and I were facing the reality of what mental illness looks like in a family on a daily basis. And so I think that probably was always part of one of my whys. But I always knew I wanted to tell people's stories, and I wanted to talk about things in a way that helped people heal. I knew that almost probably from the day I was born. My mom tells the story of this, that even as a little girl, I used to do organizational consulting, and I really feel like home management is a sacred calling. And so I would often tell her, as she was dealing with some of her own mental illness struggles and trying to work and be a single mom, I would say, okay, how about we plan like movie night, which back in the olden days was what was on TV. We didn't have VCRs, right? And popcorn, and you and my sister Meg can sit on the couch and all clean the house. And it was because I really believed in the power of that tool to create peace in the home. And I felt like as a young child that if I could be an instrument for God in my family for healing and peace, then maybe everyone would be okay. Now, juxtapose that to the fact that I mistakenly heard the message in my heart from God at the age of 7. I write about this very openly in my forgiveness book, that I believed if I was perfect, because I could feel one day walking home from school, I felt like I saw God's mission for me. And I had a sense as a 7-year-old, whatever that looks like, what that was. I just got the sense that all of us, not just me, but all of us are on the planet for something bigger than doing my homework and playing with my friends. And so I had a glimpse where I felt like God kind of showed me that I had a mission bigger than just whatever was my day-to-day. But I had this mistake. That message came in my heart, And in my head, I interpreted that to mean, oh, if I'm perfect, I can save all the people I love in my life. Like if I live my life perfectly, somehow I could control and stop some of the trauma I was seeing unfold. Fast forward that to the year my sister took her life, those two ideas exploded, because suicide is a what if grief. I had lost another little sister when I was 10. She was almost 2. And so I had already grieved grandparents and a father-in-law, my other sister, my friends that had died in high school. But the suicide grief is this kind of what if grief. Like, what could I have done to stop that? We don't do that with cancer, heart attacks, car accidents, right? And I'm not saying grief you don't go back and replay, you always do, but I definitely had to reconcile that there is only one Savior, and I am not him. I can influence, I can invite, I can inspire, I can love, I can support, but in all the messaging and all the media and all the speaking I do, I always am asked about that because there's always someone in the audience that has also gone through a suicide grief. And so I had to reconcile from what your question is, my 7-year-old sense of my mission, to this point in my life where I was over 40 and my worst fear was playing out. And so what I will say is that when I get asked, I don't even know, 20 times a week, I get a message from someone that says, I want to be a speaker, I want to be a writer, and they want to know my pattern. Like, did I go enroll in a class? And I haven't. Did I go to this conference? And I haven't. And I'm not saying that is my path is your path. I'm just saying that's not the pattern I have followed. I don't have a book agent. I didn't go to writing conferences. When God told me a few years ago to write my first book, I argued with him for like months because I had been a magazine editor, and then he had brought me home. He had told me to quit this dream job to be home, and that's another story of why that happened. But I felt like there were enough books out there. There didn't need to be more books on Amazon's bookshelf. And so when people ask me that question, I say, are you willing to volunteer at your church in the nursery? And they think, what does that have to do with my mission? Or I will often ask them questions like, are you willing to show up and help your neighbor today? And they're like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with getting on TV. And it has everything to do with that. Are you willing to live your life? Are you willing to go through your wilderness experiences? Because my sister's suicide is not the only wilderness experience I've experienced the last 6 years, especially. We've gone through 2 job losses. We've lost everything. We've gone through infertility. I've been diagnosed with lupus in the past. I have struggled to raise my children. I have worked through marital issues. My parents were divorced. There was remarriages. There were deaths. All of those are just like a snapshot of the things that are what I believe were my training ground. So I'm not saying there's not value in hiring an agent, going to a writer's conference, joining a speaking group. It's just not the path for me. The biggest thing I've come to know is what I learned when I was 7 years old, walking home from school that day. And that is, listen to the voice of God in your life. Now, just like what I just shared with you, I heard his voice in a way, I interpreted it in a very specific way that wasn't necessarily 100% accurate. He wasn't asking me at age 7 to be perfect. He was just trying to show me that I had influence and that I had impact in the world, and I was going to have bigger impact, and I could influence my family for good. But I misinterpreted that message to mean this, and I thought it would look like this. And I'm here to tell you, the last 5 years, 7 books, over 800 speaking events. I haven't even counted how many times TV, radio, podcasts. I will tell you, it doesn't look the way I thought it was going to look either. I think all the cool stuff is the hard stuff. So parenting, writing, speaking, volunteering, parenting, whatever that is, God's putting it on your heart. Listen to that. But he is so beautiful in how he takes us step by step. So that's why I say, are you willing to volunteer at church? Are you willing to go to your neighbor's house if that comes onto your heart today? Well, what does that have to do with speaking and writing? You have no idea what conversations you'll have if you're willing to show up at church and volunteer. You have no idea. If I could tell you, I mean, even your and my mutual friend list, those are from like 5 different worlds of my worlds, right? God is orchestrating his kids. We're all a family. And so you have no idea that when you take this job or you volunteer here or you go through this health scare or you go through a divorce or your kid deals with an addiction, what that is training you and preparing you to do your mission. I'm only doing this mission because God's asked me to do it. I'm not doing it because I'm smarter, I'm fancier, I have some secret knowledge about the universe. I'm showing up in my own life and my tail is getting kicked. There's areas of my life, like I keep getting asked from people, when am I going to write a book about parenting baby adults, that young single adult age of college age? Because there's tons of parenting books for like potty training, teaching your kid to read, and even some parenting books on like, there's tons of bloggers about like how to help your kid through ADD or autism or whatever. There is nothing out there really about how do you parent an adult that is really fully grown and legal, but their frontal cortex isn't developed till 25. So how do you show up in your college age kid's life in a way that's supportive without taking over for them? Well, I keep telling people, stop asking me. I don't know what I'm doing yet.
I haven't lived it.
I'm in the curriculum right now. I'm hitting it and I'm missing it. Like the other day, I had a wonderful conversation with my college kid. And then the next day, I had a not great conversation with my college kid. Some semesters, I'm like, okay, we know boundaries. We're doing great. We're showing up in his life, but not too much. We're giving him space. And then other days, I'm like panicked and I want him to come home and I want to take over his life and all that. So what I'm saying is, to answer your question, your mission is on your heart. It's being unfolding in your life. But if you think that it's going to go through this, like, I'm not saying you don't call a mentor. I'm not saying you don't call a friend that's doing what you want to do. I believe in that collaboration. But realize God is uniquely preparing you. And sometimes we think it's going to look like you go to this conference and then you come out of that conference and you become diamond level in your company, or you sell 1 million books, or you go on Oprah, you know. And what I've learned is it's much more messier than that, and it's nuanced, and it's a lot of starts and stops. And sometimes we think that when we read the scriptures, we're seeing all these stories unfold. So we turn one page, that's 300 years. And all of a sudden we're like, well, wait, God's not burning a bush on the mountain for me. You know, God didn't put a Leahona outside my tent. Okay, God didn't, send me. But look at Joseph of Egypt. He went in a pit, and I'm sure he thought all of his dreams were dead. His mission was dead. He wasn't going to accomplish anything because he got sold into Egypt. And then that story unfolds perfectly to show us exactly how God is like, no, you're going to have a huge stop. You're going to think your family life is over. You're going to be thrown literally in a pit and then sold, and you're going to have no contact. And I'm going to put you right in the place to be next to the Pharaoh to save your family and do this beautiful mission. I think Joseph of Egypt is the perfect pattern that all of us, whatever you think your mission is, he had to keep trusting God. I'm not saying he woke up every day going, this is awesome. Man, Potiphar's wife, that's brilliant, right? Like Joseph's the perfect example. He's in jail for being falsely accused. And because he's in jail, he has conversations with the baker and all these people that lead to these conversations later that end to his mission. So when people call me, I'm going to just start saying, go study Joseph of Egypt. That's how you become a speaker, writer, blah, 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 blah. Which also means God knows. He and I have a deal. I just did a silent retreat this weekend. I had to go to Arizona to speak at an event. I got to go to Arizona. I should say it that way. And so some scheduling things happened to where my flight was booked and I had a free day. So instead of rearranging, I took the chance to have a silent retreat. I took my journals. I just posted about this on Instagram and Facebook if you follow me there, and on LinkedIn. And I thought, oh, I'm going to get all this clarity. I'm going to process all my emotions. All this stuff I've put on the shelf emotionally, I'm going to pull that down. I'm going to map out 2020 because I'm already being booked for speaking. I'm going to have clarity about my next book, blah, 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 blah. Oh my gosh. It was a disaster. I felt like a disaster. And I woke up and I tried to journal and I read scripture and I did prayer, all that stuff. And I could feel the tears were going to come. And I was like pushing it down, because I thought if the dam breaks, I'm in trouble. And I journaled and I mapped out and I did my gratitude list and my fear list. And I did all the stuff I teach. And finally I was like, I'm going to go sit outside because it's warm. I went to the pool and I started to cry. And it just kept coming and coming. And all I felt, my biggest clarity from my retreat, was my family matters the most above all else. God and my family. And I called a friend afterwards who's very intuitive and very clear and is one of my go-to marble jar friends that helped me. And I just said, this did not turn out at all. I don't have any clarity about this, this, and this, and this. And this silent retreat isn't, all I do is feel this aching and missing my family. And she said, well, maybe that's exactly what you're supposed to feel. So I would say, are you letting God be your compass? And if he's saying to you, walk away from your dream job, if he's saying, go volunteer at church, if he's saying, call your neighbor, I believe Joseph of Egypt shows that's exactly how he gets us ready for our mission.
Totally.
Sorry, that was a little preaching right there. Sorry. That was a little.
You're passionate about it.
Amen, preaching, because it's what I wrestle with. It's what we all wrestle with, right? I think when I was a new mom and waking up with babies all night and every day felt like Groundhog Day, the same laundry, the same shopping, the same vacuuming, the same everything. And I call homework time bewitching hours because that's when I wanted to drink, and I don't drink, but I wanted to drink every day at homework time because I was like, how am I going to do homework and still make dinner? Forget about organic, whatever. My kids, when they were little, thank goodness we didn't have Instagram because I didn't even know, I was just doing the best I could. But I think all of us struggle as women, especially with social media. Everyone else looks like they figured out their mission. Everybody else has an Etsy store, best-selling book, a podcast. Everyone's got a podcast now, right? And so the other day I was like, part of my prayer list this weekend was, do you want me to keep doing? I don't want to do what everyone's just doing. I want to do what you sent me to earth to do, God. And that means surrendering. That means saying, like, it's a mess right now. And if you try to rush through some of that stuff, that's the sweet stuff. That's the training ground. That's the preparation. The pit was exactly where Joseph was being prepared to be next to the Pharaoh in power. Right there, right? But in his heart and mind, I'm sure he was like, well, everything's ruined. Everything's ruined. I'm a disaster. So I'm not great at it. I'm passionate about it because it's what I wrestle with. I want a plan. I want an email from God. I want a checklist. I want it all mapped out. Then I can show up and say, but I tell this story. I should pause here if you have another question. But when God told me to write the book, I argued. My husband lost a job. And at the time we were carpooling about 4 hours a day. And I had help with carpool. And so all of a sudden he was home and I was able to put together the workings of the first draft of I Can Do Hard Things with God, my first book. I submitted it to a publisher and it was rejected. I submitted it to a second publisher and it was rejected. Well, that's not like Harry Potter statistics because she had, I don't know, like 35 rejection letters, but it was enough for me to go, maybe I heard God wrong. Maybe he didn't really want me to publish a book. He just wanted me to write a book. So I almost put it in my drawer and never tried again to submit it. As serious things happen, including my friend Richard Paul Evans, who has 39 best-selling books on New York Times. He had my original manuscript, and he emailed me right when I was about to give up, and he said, don't self-publish and don't give up. And I'm not trying to take away from self-publishing. He just wanted me to take a more traditional route. And that and a series of other things that our family did that had nothing to do with the book led to a job that my husband got and a secretary he had. And that secretary ended up quitting to go work at the temple as a secretary, and she knew a publisher. That was it. Like, it was those connections, right? So I resubmitted again. In that time period, that was September of 2013. I think I'm getting the dates right. And then let me look at my wall because it tells me the dates. Yes. And so between that time period and March, I didn't know if it was being published, but Meg died in March. She killed herself in March. 6 weeks after her death, my publisher Covenant came to me and said, we want to publish this and anything else. Well, my friends, let me tell you straight up, every time I got a rejection letter, if God had told me the truth of the timing, what would I have done? What would I have done if he said to me, there's a story about Meg's suicide that hasn't happened yet. It is going to be the first chapter of your book. You don't know that yet. So you can't publish until she dies. That's literally what happened. I would have freaked out. I would have said, and this can trigger some people. I've told this story enough times that some people are like, what do you mean? God knew. Why didn't he stop it? Well, welcome to my hell. I wonder all the time, why didn't I stop it? Her bishop wonders, why didn't I stop it? Her therapist, why didn't I stop it? That's suicide. That's the crazy storm left behind with suicide. But what I'm here to say to you is, I just sent a message to someone that reached out and said, why do people say God doesn't give you more than you can handle? If he knows a suicide's going to happen, why doesn't he stop it? Well, that's a whole nother podcast. If you want to call me, we'll do that one. And I answered her in a very simple terms. God does know when things are going to happen, but he believes in agency. And in my case, he had put something in my heart so that most of that book was ready, but there was this one piece that hadn't happened yet. So the timing looked like I had failed. I got rejection after rejection. Meg dies, and then I rewrite what's in there. That first chapter of that book opened so many doors because at the time, 5 years ago, no one was talking about mental illness and suicide within religious communities the way they are now. They just weren't. That book includes betrayal, mental illness, suicide, infertility. It has 18 stories of different perspective stories. And I was fulfilling my dream right then, like with this book. But every time there was a rejection, I was like, God, you told me to do this. I'm only doing this because you told me to do it. Why isn't it working out? And I always say, well, he couldn't tell me everything. When I would kneel in prayer, frustrated, he couldn't say, hold on, because Meg has to kill herself first. That would have been the craziest prayer ever. So he just kept telling me what he could. He kept saying to me, don't stop, keep going. And right around the times I would give up, someone would swoop in and give me some encouragement. I call that hope. Hope isn't a feeling, it's a plan B. I would do a plan B and a plan B. And so I like to share that story because your listeners have dreams on their heart. Some of them are trying to fulfill those dreams. Many of them are fulfilling their mission in a way that doesn't look the way they thought, and the doors keep shutting. And they're frustrated because they're thinking, well, God isn't helping me. Well, so was Joseph. In the pit, in the prison, frustrated. And then that day when his brothers came to the court and he saw clearly the power he had to save them, can you imagine what he realized about all the stops he had lived through? And that's my little version of that, is publishing my very first book. And then that did much better, I think, than the publishers thought. And honestly, God had shown me 4 books. And this is a scoop on your podcast, by the way. When God showed me the first book, he showed me 4 in the With God series. 3 are published. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
That's awesome. Well, and I find that really is, how you said, like, things won't look like you expect them to. And the thing like, let me take that nursery calling, or let me help my neighbor, that's God's testing. He says, hey, I'm giving you a prompting. Can you follow me on the little things? And if you can follow him on the little things and trust him even when it doesn't look like it makes sense, then he can pull all those little puzzle pieces in and make it look like this grand vision, or the tapestry, or the orchestra, or the pottery, or whatever we want, whatever analogy we choose to use, that God really is working in all the details, and it looks messy in the process.
And I would even add to that, God is also working out the missions of my children, my spouse, my extended family. So like in the story of the analogy of Joseph of Egypt, his siblings and his father were having their own separate learning experience. And I love that God is a mighty God. He's orchestrating all of our missions and stories to come together. But oftentimes, for example, with mothers, or like with me with the magazine, I was living the dream. I was an editor of a regional magazine back before Facebook. This is how we were connecting communities. Now we can have a private Facebook group for everything. Back then, you had to try to put a magazine together so that people would read a story of a woman that was living your life. That's how we did it. And when he said to me in the temple one day, leave the magazine, he didn't have the next step revealed. He didn't show me the why. Just like he is seeing if you'll say yes to the nursery calling or the neighbor, he's also seeing if you'll say no.
Yeah.
God is a saying no God. He's a boundaried God. He is a loving God, but he doesn't say yes to everything. And oftentimes, especially with women and men, in the work I do, they don't want to say no. I write about it in my book, You Are More Than Enough. There's a whole chapter on this. That when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. And when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And when I listen to him say, walk away from the dream opportunity of my lifetime, my face was on a billboard at the time. I was doing TV. I had the opportunity to work from home, be a mom, and run a magazine. That I didn't go to college to get a journalism degree. And so that was a dream. And when he said walk away, I walked in the very next Monday to my boss and quit. And he argued, he offered a raise. If Jed's watching this, he knows this story. And we argued for a half hour. And finally I told him, God told me. Well, then he's like, great. Well, I can't argue with God. Well, I left that not knowing why. I went home and thought, now what? For the next year, I did some internal work. I addressed some big demons in my life that I had put on the shelf because I had been busy being a mom, running a magazine, blah, 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 blah. And in that year process, I healed some things that needed to be addressed that I had ignored. That was also preparatory for what was coming next, which was my son needed to be homeschooled for a year. That's why I had to say no to this to do this. Well, okay, that's not super glamorous, you know? And so, but looking back, God was orchestrating my story and my son's story. That was a game changer for him. It was a time for healing for us both. It put him on a different trajectory that has affected his whole life so far. Okay? And so, and that experience was so isolating to me. To be home homeschooling a teenage boy who was in junior high. I have a teaching degree, and that was much harder than when I taught 60 kindergartners. Let me just tell you that. Because my 13-year-old son didn't want to hang out with his mom. What I learned during that year was so crucial, because that became my why for writing the first book. I remember thinking, I'm living this thing that is very private. Out of respect to my son, I couldn't tell everyone why. And I kept thinking, if I could talk to one other mother like me, we didn't have Instagram yet, one other mother that understood what I'm feeling. My son's not doing drugs, but he acts like he's doing drugs. I don't know what to do with a teenage boy, his hormones, his ADD, all that. He doesn't have any secrets because he's in college and he knows, like, people come up to him at BYU all the time and they know everything about him because I talk about him all the time. But I met one other friend that went through that a year after we went through it. You and I have her as a friend, Cherie Burton.
Oh, yes.
Cherie's my dear friend. And Cherie and I were going through the same thing and didn't know it. Her son Noah and my son Cameron are close friends. Noah's my other kid. And I'm going to tell you that I remember having a conversation with her and I thought, well, where were you? I just needed one other woman to say, hey, yeah, I see you. And that was the genesis for why I knew I had to write the book that I had to write. That first book was to be that best friend, that confidant that you could have by your bedside on your table to read, to validate you, when you couldn't literally tell anyone else what was going on yet because you were keeping confidences for someone you loved. That's the power of books for me, is that books can privately be your best friend and show up for you in a way that is personal. And I believe the Spirit does that. I believe in the editing process, but the Spirit compensates for whatever doesn't get said, so that a story you read, this is why I write nonfiction and not fiction, because I don't know how to dream fantasy stories. I only know how to tell real stories. Cherie, I remember one conversation with her was so healing to me because I felt like we could collaborate on how we got through something. But I remember walking away thinking, well, where was she? Why didn't we talk? Like even 6 months ago, it would have helped me so much. We do have tools now. I mean, I think we build communities on social media. For as bad as social media can be, it can connect you to other families so that you feel a validation. But for me, that's one of my big whys for writing, because to me, a book can live on someone's shelf. I'm not trying to take away from audiobooks, but I believe in paper and I like paper because you can hand a book. You can't hand a digital audiobook to someone. You can buy a book for someone that is going through a hard thing. That's what I hear often about my books. When you don't know what to do to help. You have a friend going through a divorce. Well, what are you supposed to do for that? You know, you have a friend going through another miscarriage. What do you do for that? A casserole is not going to fix that, right? You have a friend going through mental illness, depression, anxiety, suicide, whatever it is. I try to write about those things because a book can sit on someone's shelf, and when they're ready, they can pick it up and go, okay, I'm going to read this today.
Well, that, and I feel like when we have inspired messages that come out in books or in audios or whatever we're teaching, these podcasts, these trainings, whatever it is, that God can use those. If you follow the inspiration to says, God said, write this, I wrote it. I don't know who it's for yet, but I know it's for somebody. And he can take that and put it into the hands of the people. He can prompt that person to buy it at the store and the other person to pick it up off the table when they're having a hard minute. And
I know,
page, you know.
And I think podcasting is the same way. So today, whoever's listening to this message, I hope that you'll feel the prompting and you'll share it with someone else. Maybe you have a friend that is homeschooling and it's hard. Or maybe you have a friend that has always had a dream of writing a book and they keep getting doors slammed in their face, whatever, right? Like, there is such goodness in our sharing of stories. And that authenticity is what I always try to lead out with. I don't care what I'm doing. I mean, I've had some opportunities to do some pretty big things that I think, oh my gosh, did God get me ready for this? Because I don't know if I can do it. And I have to remind myself, all I can do is show up and be me. That's it. That's all I've got to offer. And some of who I am may seem familiar because you know other people like me, but all of us, I believe, every person on the planet has a unique contribution. Every person has a unique mission to live. In Christianity, we call that being part of the body of Christ. And if you read in the Bible about that, it's very specific that one of us is the hand and one is the head and one is the ear and one is the lips and one is the leg and one is the... And when we are kind of living in a society that's a little bit like, let's all be the nose, you know, like everyone should be the nose. And then you go, that's a signal you've been on Instagram too much today. because you're scrolling and you're like, well, everybody's a nose. I thought I was an ear. I really like to listen to people. I mean, I hear from people all the time, like they'll say, are you so scared to stand in front of these 1,000 people at Boise State? No, that doesn't scare me at all. I can stand in front of 4,000 people. I can do a 5-minute live TV spot. Doesn't freak me out. I'm not saying I don't worry. I worry more on the preparation. Am I getting the messages from God before I stand on the stage? That's where I get nervous. But don't ask me to sing in front of anybody. That freaks me out. And yet I have some of the dearest friends. I can name some of from Lauren Daigle to Hillary Weeks to Jenny Phillips I can name a million people that they open their voice to sing. And oh my gosh, like that's what brings me to God. And their mission is God through their voice. I had the chance to do a movie this year. Well, I did it last year. It came out this year called The Fighting Preacher.
It was so good, I'll tell you.
I don't have a big spot, but if I don't tell people I'm in it and then they watch it and then they see me and they say, you didn't tell me. So now I feel bad about all the people I didn't tell. I have a very short scene at the beginning. So if you watch it, make sure you have your popcorn. You'll miss me. But I did 1 day of shooting for that scene. It's a great story. It's if you are a T.C. Christensen fan, you will love. I think it's one of his best works. 17 Miracles Kept Me Alive After Meg Killed Herself. But this movie TC has a brilliant way of making you laugh and making you cry and telling true stories that are inspiring. And he's in my book, The Decision That Changed My Life. That's how we connected. And I read the Love Kennedy script and helped with that a little bit. And so he said, do you want to come be in the movie? I said, sure. I had no idea what it takes to be in a movie. I did not know how many times you take a shot of the same scene and then you do a different shot 72 times. It made me want to poke my eyeballs out. When I was done with it, I was like, I am so grateful God did not put on my heart to be a movie star. In my book, Choosing Joy, there's a story of an actress in there that knows she's called to serve in Hollywood. It's an amazing story. She's single, not married, and she wants to be married, and she shares her story of being an actress. And it's a beautiful depiction of like God is using all of us in very unique ways. I'm so glad I did it. It's just not going to be a thing that I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to keep doing movies. I'm not saying I would never do it again, but I left that day at the set thinking, for all those this is their mission. It fills their soul to do it. I loved being a part of it because I love TC and I love uplifting films. I love that there are still filmmakers making uplifting movies, and I love that. But I just think it's so important we don't become all the nose. We're not all the nose. Some of us are the hand of Christ. Some of us are the ear of Christ. Some of us are the mouth of Christ. But if you're the mouth and you have friends that are the nose, we're all in the face. So then we think we're the same. Brene Brown talks about this, that when you're swimming, if you're swimming in your lane and you glance over, you'll move into the lane of someone else. And then you're not doing your mission. This podcast is about that consecrated life. Are you willing to stay in your lane? And I always say eyes on Jesus. That's why I had to do the silent retreat. My eyes weren't on Jesus enough, And I think that's why we have daily practices of prayer, of meditation, of scripture reading, of whatever. For me, even moving my body. You and I delayed today because I needed to get to the gym. Well, I also needed sleep because my flight was canceled this weekend. And so I flew all night long. I was awake all night and I'm still catching up. So when we're not clear on Jesus, and if you don't define God as Jesus, great. Whatever it is that helps you stay connected to your soul, that's the consecrated life path. And that goes right back to Joseph of Egypt, or starting a career in writing or speaking. Are you willing to hear him above all the chatter? You can't be the ear you were designed to be if you're trying to be the nose. Can I get a hallelujah?
Hallelujah. Beautiful. I feel like you've already answered most of the questions just by your talking. So we are good.
my problem. When I do interviews, my mom is always like, how did you think of everything to say? I'm like, Mom, that is not my problem. It's the not talking that's my problem.
Okay, so maybe this goes back to the story of writing that first book when
Okay.
you were arguing with God.
Yes.
What was the point when you were 100% committed to follow your path? Because I know there's been those times when God's like, hey, do this. Okay, now drop all this you just did and now do this. You know, when you were like, okay, I'm in, I'm going to do whatever it is you tell me to do, no matter how hard it is, no matter how bad I want to or how bad I don't want to. And, you know, if I want to hold this and not let it go, or I want to take that and you say no, or
yeah.
you get to that point.
So it goes back to that God shows us his patterns. One of the patterns you'll see in scripture is threes, and he'll speak in threes. He'll give three witnesses. There's a scripture in the Bible that says one or more are gathered in my name, there I am also. That's three. That's you, one other person, and God. That's three. I believe in the Godhead, so not the Trinity. I believe in God, the Father, the Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost. Those are my three best friends, right? So what happened was he put it on my heart. He gave me the title, which in book world, to have the title of my three books be what God showed me 6-7 years ago is kind of extraordinary, because publishers have the right of refusal. If you're being published traditionally, you're giving your story over to a committee, a team, and there's a graphics team, and there's a title choosing team, and there's editors, and there's all that. And the title that was given for my book, and all three books, have been what they are. So first he showed me that. He showed me the cover. The cover isn't, I'm trying to see what's behind me. Oh, I don't have the covers behind me. But the covers are not what I saw, but the concepts of them have been. That's another thing that I want to share. So remind me. And I ignored it, because part of what we ignore when God speaks to us is our fears. I had a long list of whys, of why I wasn't capable enough, smart enough, there were lots of whys of fear. And so I didn't tell it. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't tell my closest friends. I didn't tell him about this impression. And then it came again. I think the second time it came, I was alone in the temple. And I thought, oh, shoot, there's number 2. And I think that time I was with my friend, and I admitted to her what it was. And then she had a witness of that. And then honestly, the third witness was when my husband lost his job. He lost his job, and I basically had help at home. And I remember hearing God say, you better write it now. Like, I knew it was gifted time. So there were my 3 witnesses. And then once I got that, I always say I want God to talk to me with a brick, not a brick wall. And so I am more afraid. This is going to make me emotional. I am more afraid of not doing what God has called me to do than doing it and failing. So that's probably what's helped me more than anything, is that I do not want my life to end on earth. It doesn't end eternally, but on earth. And then to give a reporting, and I didn't do what he asked me to do, what he sent me here to do, because A, B, or C, insecure, not smart enough, not cute enough, not whatever. The other day, my sweet boy that's in college trying to figure out his post-mission life decided he was going to go audition for an a cappella singing group. Now, anyone that knows him knows he has a beautiful voice, but he doesn't even sing for his family. And he's definitely not a kid that wants to do, he struggles a little bit more to do things he's afraid he's not going to be good at, like all of us. But my daughter's a little bit more like, oh, if I don't get picked, no big deal. I tried. He's a little bit more, if I'm not 100% feeling like I could maybe be good at this, he'll hold back. Well, the week of the audition came, and he tried out. Ironically, I was in Arizona a couple weeks ago again speaking, And I called him after the audition. I said, how did it go? And he goes, not good. I've been sick this week. I was dehydrated. It was early morning. I was so nervous. And I said, okay, I just want you to know, Dad and I don't even care. We're just so proud of you for doing this really scary thing. We're so proud of you for trying. Well, he got in and he was shocked. He told me a couple of days later that he had been bragging about me, and I didn't know what that meant. And he said this: we were at a retreat with this new a cappella group. And we were talking about courage. And I told them my mom, and seriously, this is the payday for the 13 years to 15 years when I didn't like him. I loved him. I just didn't like him. He was hard for me. And I was hard for him. He said to me, Mom, I told them my mom will do whatever God asks. She'll look foolish for him. It doesn't matter if she's never written a book, if she's never gone on TV, if she's never gone to the Middle East to speak. If he puts it on her heart, she'll do it. And so I decided I could be foolish for God. And I had never done an a cappella group before, but I could try. My friend, I have to tell you, that was the greatest moment for me as a mom, because I've worked really hard the last few years to balance the work-life juggle and to try to always make sure my family knew they were always my priority above all else, but still show up for God in this other way, this mission that I know I'm called to do with writing and speaking and all that. For my children or my child to reflect back to me that he has watched me do scary things. He's watched me try to show up where God's asked me to do it, whether I thought I was going to do well or not. And that's changing him. And that's inspired him to show up and do his mission. That's why this podcast is important. This is why the consecrated life conversation has to happen. Because when you show up the way you were intended to show up, even if it's scary, and even if it is messy, and even if you fail, it inspires me to do that. And the more we do that for each other, the more we give permission to say, no, you be the nose, because I'm trying to be the ear. Let's do this. And for me, that was the greatest thing. That was the greatest parenting win, because in some way, my children have watched me do this. And my family is very, very, very supportive. They know I'm doing a mission, and they are very clear on that. And I think they also trust that because it's a mission, if or when the time comes to stop, I've walked away like I did with homeschooling before. I'll do it again. Because it's not about me, you know, and most of the time I will say, if you're listening to this and you're living through a season of no, or you're living through a season of wilderness, or you're living in a season of, okay, I listened to God, I walked away, and now there's just nothing happening. He's working on you. You're being refined. Like the beautiful work of Joseph was, what did he do in the pit? What did he do in the jail? What did he do in Egypt when he was away from his family? That's where the real work happens. It's not on the book shelf or on the TV screen or on the podcast platform. It's inside. And that's the tough stuff. That's the scary work. That's the not glamorous work. That's the, I don't know if I'm messing this up. I think that's what parenting is, right? Like, it's a marathon. You don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm throwing every dart at the dartboard and I'm hoping something is sticking, but I don't know. I don't know if my kid turns 25 and I look back and go, well, I messed that whole thing up. I do know this. I know that the day I meet God face to face and we have a conversation face to face, because we have conversations every day, but face to face, and he asks me about my parenting, I will tell him I 100% did everything that I hoped to try to do. Was it perfect? No way. But 100%, I gave it 100%, because they are stewardships to me that he's trusted me with, but they're individuals. So for your listeners, if you're listening and you're like, my kid is in jail, my kid is on heroin, my kid isn't going to college, my kid is suicidal, my kid is struggling with OCD, whatever that autism, and you're thinking, I'm doing everything, like rolling their eyes because they're listening to me go on and on about TV and books, and the most sacred work is happening behind closed doors. And there's no guarantee on that. There's no map for that. There's no, oh, I'm consecrating my life and it's turning out perfectly, because most of that is a long-term plan. And you don't know if what you consecrated in taking care of that child in a wheelchair, or helping that child autistically try to go to their first party and not freak out. That to me is the most inspiring. I got asked the other day, I was on a panel of influencers, and I was asked who I follow on social media. They didn't probably like my answer. I follow normal people. The people that inspire me are moms and dads that are just trying to figure it out. The people that inspire me the most are not some famous Hollywood person that has 1 million followers. I'm inspired by the woman at the grocery store that is trying to use coupons because her husband's unemployed. That's, to me, a consecrated life. So I take very serious that I have a platform right now. But I love when people come up to me in person that only follow me on social media, and they go, so sorry, you are like my best friend and you don't even know me. That's a sign that hopefully I'm sharing things publicly that are authentic, because I don't have all the answers. I don't have it all figured out, and I'm fighting my own stuff. I'm about one step ahead of every sentence I'm typing, And so if you feel like you're just an everyday person and you're listening to this podcast or watching this video and you're thinking, well, I don't know if I'm living my consecrated life because all I did today is change diapers. Sorry, that's the most sacred thing you could do on the planet. When I used to do consulting for organization and being balanced in that, whether I was talking to corporate America or church groups, or one day I spoke to a group of foster parents, and I said the most sacred work you could do is change diapers. I had been saying that for a couple of years. I put it in some curriculum that people could buy. And I said, you're doing the work of God when you vacuum, when you change diapers. People think Mother Teresa did the work of God because she was in Calcutta and she was building schools and hospitals. Yes. But if you're living a life of paying the bills and showing up for your family, that's consecrated living. And this woman in the back stood up and she goes, you're right. You're right. Changing diapers is the most sacred work. She says, I'm fostering, this breaks my heart, I'm fostering a 10-year-old boy right now who never had his diapers changed. The first 3 years of his life, no one changed his diapers. Well, do you know what happens when you don't have your diaper changed? Your body, literally his brain and body, did not understand how to go to the bathroom because he was left sitting in his fecal matter and his urination every day, all the time. So she was literally trying to teach a 10-year-old boy how to go to the bathroom in the bathroom because no one had given him the sacred gift that everyone deserves of a diaper change. And after that, I was so grateful that I had evidence. It's what I knew in my soul, but now I could actually declare to people, when you show up in your life, whatever platform that is, it is sacred work. But for me, I consecrate everything I do. Our prayer before we did this podcast, I do the same on my podcast. Before I walk into the gym, when I remember, say a prayer. God, consecrate this effort. This hour or this half hour I'm at the gym, consecrate it for my highest good. Which doesn't mean I'm going to be a bikini model. It doesn't mean I'm going to run a marathon. It's, can you consecrate that I'm trying to show up and take care of my stewardship, which is my body, and consecrate it. So for your listeners, if you are like, man, a career of this or a mission of that or whatever of this, is so far off my radar because I'm just in survival mode today. I'm just trying to help my kid not use drugs tomorrow. I'm just trying not to kill my husband because he's had another affair. You're living the consecrated life.
I feel like really it is just saying, God, use me. Like wherever I'm at, what do you want me to do today? And if that's cuddle your kids and read a book, then that's great. And if it's to the point where he says go write a book, then you'll know when that time comes because it'll be in your heart and you'll feel it.
And you will have practiced the muscle of learning the language of God, which is a language. I'm not good at languages. My son was just taking a French class and he was failing it because we have to learn the language of God. You know, it's a different language. And you practice that in the middle of the night when you're holding a colicky baby. You know, you practice that when you're caring for your parent that is dying of Alzheimer's. That's when you learn the language of God. And so, yeah, when people ask me, I mean, you can message me, but I'm going to just send them this podcast. Go listen to this podcast. If you want to know how to be a speaker and a writer, you're not going to like my answer. It's change your kid's diaper. What does that have to do with anything? It has everything to do with it. I mean, you can take the wheel away from God and do something just because you want to do it. Great. I just don't want to live that way. You know, I don't want to live that way. I would much rather live the way of me and God driving together. And that means he gets to decide sometimes things or ask of me things or prompt me on things that are not my plan. And they're not fun. And they're not glamorous. And they're not cute. And no one's going to give me an award for it. You know, none of your kids come home every day and go, oh my gosh, Mom, you got milk today. We're going to give you a raise. You planned our Halloween costume. You got all the Christmas gifts bought under budget. High five, Mom, you get a raise. You get a promotion. You're like advanced placement, Mom. No one does that. You know, the consecrated work is the sacred, personal, private wrestling. And then it sometimes looks like fruit, like published books or TV appearances, or you do get an award, or your kid does make it to college, or you do pay off your house, or whatever that is. But be careful that you don't, we put value on, like, this person got a raise at work, so God must be really loving them. And this family, they just lost their home because they filed bankruptcy. God must not be loving them. They're both stewardship assignments. I just listened to an interview with Kanye West. I am not a Kanye West fan, but I am now. He has gone through this whole process of trying to overcome pornography addiction. He has tried to get clean. He deals with mental illness. He's started a church, and he's just released his first gospel album, and it's a rap album called Jesus is King. And he's being mocked in the public for this, that he's, you know, people are questioning whether it's really authentic. And he just gave an interview about a consecrated life. And I posted it on my Facebook page if anyone wants to go see it today. He declares really openly when he turned his life over to God, God is doing crazy stuff with him. But who would have thought 5 years ago that Kanye West would be advocating for God? And he was asked by the interview, why do you think you had to fall so hard? And he said, because God is bragging now in my life. Like, if everything had been pretty okay, then this wouldn't be as obvious. But I was at the bottom. And so what's happening now has to be God. It can't be about anything else. I fell so hard that now it is all about God. And I think what a beautiful example of consecrating your life. And everything's about God for him right now. And that to me is miraculous.
So beautiful.
I know, right?
So beautiful. Thank you so much. Send me the link for that video as well, and I'll link that because obviously they won't be watching on the same day we're recording.
Right now, it's carpool karaoke, but it's on an airplane with James Corden. And Kanye's given a few interviews recently with this new album, but it's a really amazing, honest, vulnerable, post about conversation about turning your life over to God and what happens when we do that.
Well, and the biggest thing is too that everybody in all the interviews that I've done have always been, this is your journey. It's you and God, and say, God, where do you want me today? And following that, not I'm going to buy this book or buy this course or take so-and-so's thing and do exactly what they did so I can have the life exactly like they have, because maybe that's not your path. And chances are it's not, because nobody's path is exactly the same.
That drives me crazy. That's the thing that drives me the most crazy. And I'm not saying there aren't good resources out there. I love to read inspiring things and listen to inspiring podcasts and hear people speak. I just heard David Brooks give a symposium at BYU, and he talked about his own consecrated life journey. And I love that. But if you're too distracted by that, following someone else's pattern or plan or course, I tend to be the one that says, don't follow me. Take what I'm saying to inspire you to follow him. If I do that, then I did a good job in my speaking. Whether it's at a school, at a corporate event, whether it's with a church group, if I turn people back to God, and I try to do that even when we're not talking about him openly, because sometimes I'm doing a TV segment and it's not about faith. You know, I always will lead out with him, but I will often say to a school group or a church group, like, if I'm saying something that inspires you to go back to your source and you don't define God the way I do, or we don't worship the same, great. But that's what I see when I'm trying to bring to the table. Am I an ambassador that helps someone else find their path? Then I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing on earth.
Beautiful. There's a song, The Image in His Countenance, the Janice Capper song. That was like my song when I was in like Young Women's, and it was like, okay, that's my quest, you know, to be such a conduit that God, they can see him when they look at me, that I can see through me.
Yeah, is that Julie Hanksty Azevedo? Yeah, I think it is. I think she's the one who wrote that one. Yeah.
Oh, did she write it? I don't know. I know Janice Capper is the one that did, or at least sang it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, if people can see Christ, if people can feel or see God in my image, then I'm progressing the way I hope to progress.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I feel like we could do like 10 more episodes.
Oh, I'm sure we could. Maybe we'll do that again later.
Yeah.
So if someone wanted to contact you, what would be the number one point of contact? And then we'll post the rest in the comments.
Well, when you have a very strange name like mine, it's very easy to find me. So if you're not into Instagram, but you love YouTube videos, you can find me there. If you don't like Facebook, but you love Twitter, I'm on both those platforms. And then I have a website. If you don't like any of the social media, you can just go to my website, and I try to upload when I do interviews and TV appearances so people can find me that way. Or you can go to Amazon and buy my books or CDs, and then you don't have to go on social media at all. So I think we talked, other than I don't blog in a formal way, I do post pretty regularly on all social media platforms. I am not on Snapchat, and I will never be on Snapchat, so don't find me there because I don't want to get into that, but I won't be on Snapchat. But everything else I'm on. So I'm on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, and Instagram.
Awesome. Just spell your website for us.
So it's my first name, Ganel-Lyn, and there's links to all those other platforms on the website. And I would love to connect with you. I do my very best. I get a lot of messages every day. Unfortunately, I get a lot of messages each week about suicide and depression and anxiety. I will do my very, very best to respond to you. If you follow me, then I tend to see your messages faster just because of the way the algorithms work. And yeah, I love to hear from others and how you're finding God and how you're facing your own wilderness experiences. And I will always do my best till the last day on earth that to help prevent suicide. If I can do that for one person, the message I always say is stay in your body. My sister Meg can't speak for herself, but I know that suicide is about one decision someone makes, not every decision they make. And it is a decision that changes all your other decisions. So if you can hear my voice or see my face, I want you to know that we need you, that there's no one that is extra. There's not an extra kid, that God made all the other kids and then he had an extra arm and leg and said, fine, I'll make that kid, but we don't need them. All of us are important. And for those that have been fighting for a long time and are tired, I get you. My sister fought for a long time and she got tired. But that body you have, no matter how imperfect it is a glory that has been given to you. And just like the mouse on my computer, when you ever have the battery go dead on this and you're trying to get the arrow to move, but you don't know the battery's dead and you're trying to get that arrow to move on your computer, this is your body, that arrow is your spirit and it's your vehicle. And so please stay in your body. And if something I've shared or that you hear on a podcast or whatever you need to do to turn the light up because the dark has gotten too much, I would say do that. For me, Christmas music is always a go-to. I don't care what month it is. You put on Christmas music, for me, the light goes on. So my poor family has to listen to Christmas music all year long because it turns the light up in my life. So I hope something I've said today or one of my books or one of my videos on YouTube or one of my posts on Instagram helped one person. That's my why. I show up for the one and the 1,000. So for the one out there that might be hearing this that is like not even sure they can show up again tomorrow alive, we need you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And if anyone else needs to turn up the light, there is a YouTube playlist for the Consecrated Life as well that has all those happy songs that pull me right out whenever to help me remember who I am and what I'm all about. So thank you so much for being with us, and we will talk to you later.